The situation in the Middle East is complex and it changes daily. That's why we called on a genuine expert, Dr. Jonathan Schanzer, for his insight. Jonathan is the executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a research institute focusing on national security and foreign policy. Jonathan previously worked as a terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Department of the Treasury and has written hundreds of articles on the Middle East and U.S. national security. He's written 4 books about Israel and often testifies before Congress and appears on television channels such as CNN, Fox News, BBC, and MSNBC. We had a wide-ranging conversation speaking about the situation in Syria, why he's not celebrating the new Syria just yet, how the potential hostage deal for the Israeli hostages should be done, and how it definitely shouldn't be done, and finished with commentary on the war in Gaza. He has some suggestions for how we can better frame the war for people who might not know where they stand on the conflict. I know you'll find this conversation fascinating. Tune in.
Jonathan, thank you so much for being here and meeting with us today. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
So let's start with what's dominating the news, Syria. Who are the biggest winners and losers of Assad's removal?
Well, I think we need to start with the patron of HTS, as it's known, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, formerly known as the Nusra Front. That is Al-Qaeda in Syria. So I guess maybe we should say the first big winner in Syria is Al-Qaeda, which is not a great development. It's obviously great that Assad's gone, that the Iranian axis is losing its power across the Middle East, but we're seeing other bad actors come up in its place. So Al-Qaeda is one big winner. The patron of Al-Qaeda here, or patrons, the Turkish regime in Ankara, which has not been terrific. I mean, people talk about it as a NATO ally, but let's just remember that this is a group that has been a sponsor of Hamas. They are obviously sponsors of Al-Qaeda. They help facilitate the rise of ISIS. During that crisis, we saw them playing a key role in facilitating the rat line of fighters coming into Iraq and Syria. Their border was very porous. They were actually also selling oil and antiquities to help fund ISIS. So this is a nasty regime that is now the patrons of the new Syria, as it were. The Qataris, also patrons of Hamas, as we know, also patrons of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, just about every bad actor in the Middle East. The Qataris have a role to play in backing them, financing them, providing them with headquarters in Doha. So they're part of this as well. So the big winners are Al-Qaeda, Turkey, and Qatar. I'm not loving the optics here so far.
Right. Israel has said that it's only concerned with securing its border and is not involved in the internal conflict. But when it comes to the regional fallout, what players is Israel likely talking to, and what is it on alert for?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that you have to understand is that the Israelis are going to be targeting a lot of assets of the former regime. They've already done it. They've taken out chemical weapons. They've taken out chemical weapons production facilities. They've taken out major platforms like aircraft, choppers, surface-to-air missiles, wide range of weapons that the regime in Damascus had amassed under Assad. So they're going to continue to shape that environment. I think on top of that, they're going to continue to keep that border secure, that area along the Hermon mountain in the Golan Heights. That needs to remain secure. And so we've seen the Israelis actually occupy positions that they've not occupied in nearly 50 years as a means of making sure that they sustain the high ground. In terms of who they're talking to, I mean, I'm sure they're still talking to the Kurds who are embattled right now. I suspect that they're going to be engaging in major clashes with the Turks or Turkish-backed Al-Qaeda or other Sunni jihadi groups. And so I'm sure that the Israelis are going to be working with them, although I think a formal alliance with them is not very likely. The Israelis are talking to some of the Druze communities that are along the border with Israel. The Druze, of course, we've seen actually some of the leaders from Syria come out and say that they'd rather be under Israeli authority after the collapse of the Assad regime. So that's going to be interesting to watch. But overall, I would say that there are very few people the Israelis can talk to. They have diplomatic relations with the Turks, but it has been a very ugly relationship between Turkey and Israel now I mean, I would argue that that ugly relationship goes way back to, if you remember, the flotilla incident of 2010. That's how long this goes back. It's 14 years of total animosity with the Turks, who have utterly embraced Hamas, jihadism, radical, causes across the Middle East. They are not friends of Israel right now. So even if Israel's talking and attempting to deconflict, it doesn't mean that things are going to go well.
Absolutely. So we're going to move over to Gaza a bit. There's recent conflicting reports of a hostage deal. In your opinion, how should this deal be done?
Well, I'll tell you how it shouldn't be done. It should not be done piecemeal with only seeing, let's say, a handful of Israeli hostages released. What we want to see right now is every last hostage, dead or alive. And this is messy stuff. It's really not pretty. It's depressing. It's sad. But we need to see every body released out of Gaza, and every live hostage, who, of course, these people will be broken. They will be a mess. I mean, we know it. When you've been living under, Hamas rule, in Hamas custody, not likely seeing the light of day for, more than a year, it's going to be rough. But they all need to come home. That's the only way this war ends. That's the way the fighting stops in Gaza, as if Hamas surrenders and they release those hostages in exchange for an end of conflict. From there, I think it's also complex in that Hamas wants to see the release of probably hundreds of prisoners that are being held in Israeli jails, many with blood on their hands. You got to remember that the Gilad Shalit prisoner swap saw the release of 1,000 prisoners. So the Israelis, this was a Benjamin Netanyahu decision, by the way. So the Israelis have a history now of making massive concessions to Hamas in exchange for the release of its of hostages. So this is, I think, a complex issue as well. How much is Israel willing to give up in terms of the release of these hostages? And then where are they going? Are they going to Qatar and Turkey? That's what Hamas has asked for. If Israel agrees to that, what Israel is basically saying, that it agrees to having these external headquarters led by nominal American allies. Qatar and Turkey are both seen as American allies. So this is sort of the normalization of Hamas in exile, which I don't like. I'd prefer to see these people exiled to places like maybe Algeria or Malaysia or even Iran itself. That would, I think, imply that that the United States, the Israelis, that we don't buy into this idea that there are moderates within Hamas, that there are political offices within Hamas. They should all be viewed and branded as toxic. And so, I think there's still some discussions underway. I do expect a deal to be done before January 20th. That's what incoming President Trump has demanded. And it does look like everybody's scrambling to get it done on both sides, right? I mean, the Hamas guys are aware of this demand. The Israelis are aware of this demand. The Qataris, the Turks, even I think the Iranians are now trying to play a role here in getting this deal done.
Fascinating. Thank you. It's also been reported that Hamas and Fatah are talking about how to govern post-war Gaza. What are the elements of this arrangement?
Well, I mean, I think it's all in flux right now. You got to remember, Hamas and Fatah have been in a state of civil war. You could say it's not a hot war, but at one point it was. I mean, 2007, they actually fought a rather brutal war in Gaza, and they've not really agreed on much ever since. They've tried in multiple ways to reconcile, to have some kind of unity government with bureaucrats, with technocrats, where they try to depoliticize this. But the thing is that for many years, these two factions have been locked in a zero-sum game, right? One wins, the other loses. That's how they viewed this. Hamas has made, obviously, at least I think it's obvious, they've made a terrible mistake in waging this war against Israel. It has blown up on them in ways that I think they did not imagine. They envisioned a Middle East where Iran, Hezbollah, Houthis, all these other groups were going to join the fighting, as they did, as we know they have, but to do so in sort of a full onslaught, combined front, 7 fronts all attacking Israel at once and defeating Israel. That obviously did not happen. Israel has largely defeated Hamas, but also it's put Iran on its back foot. The Assad regime has collapsed. Hezbollah just declared a ceasefire. Israel's effectively won this war, and Hamas is decimated. So now Hamas, if anything is going to be preserved of their rule in Gaza, they actually need the Fatah faction, the PLO, to work with them to preserve them. I'm not sure the PLO and Fatah want to do that. I think the best thing that could happen here is that Hamas is truly defeated, it surrenders, and then we start to talk about the security arrangements in the Gaza Strip. That would be, of course, Israel's responsibility. But I think more importantly, we need to be thinking about a future political environment where, look, the Israelis don't like the Fatah faction. They don't like the Palestinian Authority or the PLO. These are guys that have been paying the salaries of terrorists with blood on their hands for years. Their rhetoric toward Israel has not been pragmatic or peaceful. I think the Israelis would like to ice them out of this process and also keep Hamas from returning. So what that means actually is a completely different political order in the Gaza Strip. And there, we've been hearing about the Israelis enlisting the help of Arab patrons like the UAE, like Saudi Arabia, possibly the U.S., possibly the Europeans, but bringing together a coalition of outsiders that, and this is going to sound ridiculous as I say it, and I always cringe as I do, but they want to turn Gaza into Singapore, right? They want to turn it into this sort of wealthy enclave on the Mediterranean that will be peaceful and that will be demilitarized, and it would give the Palestinians that sort of sense of building something positive. But as far as the Israelis are concerned, and I think I agree, it's really difficult to imagine the Palestinian Authority doing it. It's impossible to imagine Hamas doing it. A new political structure, a new political order is really what's necessary right now for Gaza to be stabilized. So I don't see much in the way of this reconciliation discussion. I just don't see it evolving into something sustainable in the Middle East.
Absolutely. And do the Palestinians living in Gaza support Hamas?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I've always kind of watched with amusement as polls come out of the Gaza Strip, especially when Hamas had full control over the Gaza Strip. It was like this silly thing that you'd see these polls coming out, and one of the questions would be like, do you support Hamas? And look, if you're living in a territory that is controlled by a terrorist organization that has absolute dominance over every part of this territory, you get a call like that asking you if you support Hamas, your answer is going to be yes. You cannot say that you oppose Hamas when you know that somebody could be listening and then beating down your door minutes later and hauling you into questioning in a prison run by a terrorist organization that's backed by Iran. So you can imagine how polling has been highly problematic in this part of the world, and in particular in the Gaza Strip. Now, fast forward to after the war, you look at Gaza, it's in absolute rubble. Hamas, by refusing to surrender, by refusing to hand over the hostages, that group has brought nothing but misery to the people of Gaza. I think that is fairly easily recognized right now. The big question in my mind is, why are people still picking up guns and joining Hamas? Right? Because we hear this, the reports suggest that there are still thousands of Hamas fighters that are actually joining the ranks, right? There are maybe 3,000 or 4,000 of Hamas's original fighters left, maybe one brigade. If that, out of the original 24, there's 23 that have been completely broken and destroyed. But yet, they continue to find fighters, young men in tracksuits picking up AK-47s and rushing to join the fight. That is, I think, a testament to the staying power of this really potent cocktail of ideologies that Hamas has long wielded. And that is Islamism, radical Islamic ideology on the one hand, and fierce Palestinian nationalist ideology. You combine those two into this cocktail, and it becomes very compelling for the Palestinian people. Now, the question is, Will that have staying power as people continue to see the destruction and the just complete disaster that Hamas has invited upon the Gaza Strip? My hope is that with maybe a bit of education, some rebuilding, the demilitarization of Gaza, hopefully, some stability in the future, that it might begin to convince the Palestinian population there that a new ideology, a new perspective, a new view toward the future, as opposed to resurrecting or litigating grievances of the past, that this is the new normal. Whether that's possible, I just don't know, but I cannot imagine right now that Hamas is being celebrated for the disaster that it has brought to the doorstep of Gaza.
Absolutely. How might this de-radicalization or demilitarization of the Palestinian people, how do you think Israel should go about that?
I gotta say, I don't think the Israelis can do it alone. I don't even think they can do it in part, to be honest, because if the Israelis are in the Gaza Strip trying to tell Gazans how to live or what to think, that's just not gonna play among this population. I mean, let's be honest. The Israelis are not very popular right now in the Gaza Strip. They've done a lot of damage to Gaza. It's been warranted. It was well within their right. It was a just war that they fought. I think we've now debunked all these claims of genocide and starvation and all the things that I think have just been propaganda. Almost the media parroting talking points of Hamas. Around the world. It's actually really embarrassing to see the way that this narrative has taken shape. But that said, it doesn't mean that the people of Gaza have to love Israel for the destruction that they undeniably brought to Gaza in response to a war that they neither wanted nor started, but they have still fought a war there nonetheless. So for them to say, here's what you need to believe, here's what you need to think, that can't happen. And that's why I think, trying to get, and I have to stress, right now the Saudis and the Emiratis do not seem interested. It looks like a fool's errand for them. It looks like it's dangerous. It looks like it's probably going to be a waste of money. It looks like it's going to be a waste of time. So they're not interested in rushing into Gaza and saying, guys, be more like us. But that's ultimately what I think needs to happen, is you need to have moderate, pragmatic Arab states that are trying to hopefully and successfully convey to the Palestinians that there is an alternative to this endless cycle of useless war. You've got a weak, society, one that does not have a strong military, one that does not have a lot of resources. If they keep fighting Israel, they're going to keep losing. Israel has shown yet again that it's the strongest, most proficient military in the Middle East. They've just bested some very powerful Iran-backed terror groups, and from all indications, it looks like they've helped to bring about the end of an entire regime in Syria, and they've weakened the air defenses and the ballistic missile production capabilities of Iran itself, rendering that country very vulnerable to potential future attacks. You put all that together and you begin to understand, Hamas, they pulled off an astounding military assault on October 7th. It was an anomaly, right? They killed 1,200 Israelis. They took more than 250 hostages. That's as good as I think they're ever going to get. And so the pragmatic Arab states need to, I think, press this upon the minds of everyone in Gaza. You're not winning anytime soon, maybe ever. So maybe it's time to figure out how to live with your neighbor. And I think that really needs to be the job of these Arab states moving forward.
So interesting. Thank you. If you could give one salient point to anyone in the world who's sort of in the middle about the Israel versus Palestine versus Hamas situation, what would you say to them?
Well, I think the framing of it is exactly what we need to address. I don't believe that this war was ever about Israel versus the Palestinians. I don't believe that this was a war between Israel and Hamas. That was one front. I think what the world needs to understand is that this was a war that Israel neither wanted nor started. But then, more importantly, every one of the bad actors that have been waging war against Israel since October 7th, they are Iran-backed proxies. That Iran has funded, armed, trained, and indoctrinated Hamas, the Houthis, the various Palestinian factions that are fighting Israel in the West Bank, the Shiite militias out of Syria, the Shiite militias out of Iraq, the Houthis out of Yemen, and Iran itself, right? This is an Iranian war that's been fought against Israel on 7 fronts. So rather than looking at Israel as this sort of Goliath fighting David in Gaza, if you begin to sort of broaden out, you begin to understand that Israel was fighting against Iran on multiple fronts, and really, turn the tide here. I think it's a remarkable reversal of fortune that we've witnessed, but it was never guaranteed. Israel was never the stronger party going in. Israel was on its back, flat on its back on October 7th, and was able to pick itself up, dust itself off, and then begin to fight back effectively against Iran and all of its proxies. The only other thing I would say beyond that is, you can widen the aperture there, or you can widen it even further. And I think it's important to realize this too, that right now there are 3 democracies, you could maybe even argue 4, that are under assault by 3 or 4 very dangerous dictatorships around the world. And those dictatorships are allied together, they have an axis, they have an alliance, and it's very dangerous. Iran is one of them, and Iran's been fighting Israel. That's one of the embattled democracies. But then you've got China and the embattled democracy of Taiwan. You've got Russia and the embattled democracy of Ukraine. And then perhaps you could even add in North Korea and the embattled democracy of South Korea. But really what you need to understand, what we all need to understand, is that there are some tectonic shifts that are taking place around the world right now. It's too soon to say that this is a world war, right? Some people will go that far. I don't know if I would go there. But what we're watching is a number of regional and world powers struggling for the future, struggling for what comes next on the global stage. I think Israel winning against Iran is a huge boost for the U.S.-led world order, and it's just one battle that will be fought, that needs to be fought right now against a bunch of this axis of aggressors, as we like to call it. So keeping that broader perspective, I think, is really important, both for the war that Israel just fought and the broader kind of wrestling match that's taking place. Again, let's not call it a world war just yet. Let's hope we never get there. But there is definitely a struggle right now for power amidst 2 very distinct alliance structures, one led by the U.S., one led by China, Russia, and Iran, and that's the one that we want to see defeated. And I think Israel has done the world a favor by delivering a significant blow to Iran over the last several months.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to be respectful of your time, but thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your insight. I know that our followers and subscribers will find this so interesting. So thank you.
My great pleasure.